Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a story that absolutely reshaped an entire region. We are objectively unpacking the complex historical context, the inciting events, and the devastating military escalation that ultimately culminated in the death of Nawab Akber Bugti. This is a sequence of events whose impact is still deeply felt today. So, let's look directly at the historical sources to understand exactly how a local grievance spiraled into a massive, full-blown conflict. A locked coffin, a suddenly collapsed cave. You gotta wonder, how exactly did the man known as the Tiger of Balochistan meet his end? To figure out how this larger-than-life figure ended up buried in a padlocked box surrounded by heavy security, we have to hit rewind. We really need to look closely at the sequence of events that ignited Pakistan's fifth and longest armed uprising, a situation where politics, tribal honor, and military force violently collided. Let's get into Section 1, the Tiger of Balochistan. We have to start with the man at the very center of this storm. To grasp his immense influence, you first need to understand his title, Tolman. It's actually a Turkish word, originally meaning 10,000, but historically it's used to denote a paramount Baloch tribal leader. Bugti took leadership of roughly 42,000 members of his tribe when he was just 12 years old. I mean, think about that responsibility at that age. He carried this heavy legacy of legendary Baloch warriors who united the peoples centuries ago. To his followers, he was literally the living embodiment of their ancestral history. What's absolutely fascinating here is the sheer duality of the man. It's like looking at two different lives. On one hand, you've got this elite, Oxford-educated intellectual. He was a huge fan of Western philosophy, fluent in English, and a politician who actually voted in favor of Pakistan's creation back in 1947. Yet, on the other hand, he was a traditional tribal chief who rigorously enforced ancient customs. He oversaw systems where accused people were forced to walk on hot coals to prove their innocence, and he even justified honor killings. He was very much a man of the modern world who rigorously upheld medieval codes. Moving on to Section 2, the Sui gas tragedy. In normal circumstances, a complex legacy like his would probably just be debated academically. But a specific, tragic, inciting incident in January 2005 changed the course of history entirely. On the cold night of January 3rd, Dr. Shazia Khalid was brutally assaulted in her room at the Sui Gas Field Hospital. Now, what's crucial to understand here is the location. This was a heavily guarded facility managed by federal forces, but located directly on Bugti territory. To Bugti, the abuse of a guest on his land was a severe, unforgivable attack on tribal honor. This really became the absolute point of no return. In the months that followed, a deeply controversial sequence of events unfolded. Instead of transparent tribal justice or a clear judicial trial, allegations of a massive state cover-up spread like wildfire. Evidence was allegedly wiped clean, and the victim was pressured and relocated out of the country by March. But the real tipping point? That happened when then-President General Pervez Musharraf went on national television and preemptively declared the prime military suspect, an army captain, to be 100% innocent before any official tribunal had even concluded. That brings us to Section 3, a state of escalation. For the Bugti tribe, that perceived denial of justice was the final spark. The region was instantly set ablaze, shifting from a fierce political grievance right into outright devastating warfare. 45%. Let that sink in. That number represents the portion of Pakistan's entire natural gas supply that was shut down almost overnight. Furious Baloch tribes retaliated against the state by firing rockets and mortar shells directly at government gas installations. Supply to major cities was abruptly halted. This local grievance had just exploded into a massive national crisis. Just look at the sheer scale of the chaos that erupted across Baloch majority areas by the end of 2005. It's staggering. We aren't just talking about a few isolated protests here. We are looking at 187 bomb blasts, 275 rocket attacks, and dozens of targeted strikes on critical infrastructure like power lines and railways. The region had literally been turned into a battlefield. The state responded with military force, and the insurgencies scaled up rapidly in retaliation. Okay, Section 4, the final negotiations. Now, right in the middle of this violent, rapid escalation, there were people behind the scenes desperately trying to pull the region back from the brink. Back-channel diplomatic efforts were launched. The ruling party's president, Chaudhry Shahjat Hussain, actually decided to travel personally to the bullet-riddled town of Dera Bugti to negotiate directly with the Nawab. But his motivation wasn't just political. It was driven by a real debt of honor.
Back in the 1970s, Akbar Bugti had boldly refused orders to eliminate Chaudhry Shujat's father, essentially saving his life. Decades later, Shujat was trying to return the favor by saving Bugti from a looming military crackdown.
But here's where things get incredibly complicated. The reality on the ground completely contradicted the negotiation cables. Two very different narratives of the conflict were playing out simultaneously. Official state channels, led by General Musharraf, vehemently denied that a major military operation was even taking place, claiming only about 1,000 troops were dealing with a rogue chief. But on the flip side, local reports, human rights commissions, and U.S. intelligence documented a massive military deployment. We're talking up to 25,000 troops, 6 army brigades, and widespread bombing. To put that in perspective, that displaced a staggering 85% of the local population in the affected areas.
Which leads us to Section 5, Death in the Cave. So, despite the heavy military presence, a final peace meeting was scheduled in Islamabad. They even sent a plane for Bugti. But right before boarding, he's informed of a sudden technical fault, and the meeting is mysteriously aborted. Seeing this as a massive red flag and a clear signal of bad faith, Bugti abandoned his home and retreated deep into the rugged Taratani Mountains. Forced to travel by camel in his late 70s and suffering from illness, he remained fiercely defiant to his very last days. He absolutely refused to let his adversaries see him as a victim. When a journalist tried to photograph him needing physical help to climb the rocks, Bugti actually stopped him, famously stating, "O Pashtun, do not take my picture like this, so the enemy thinks Bugti has become weak." He made it crystal clear he would rather die fighting in the mountains than fade away in a bed.
And this brings us to August 26, 2006. Military personnel finally located his remote mountain hideout. But what actually happened next remains a massive point of intense historical dispute. Military spokespeople claimed that as soldiers approached to negotiate, the ancient cave suddenly and naturally collapsed on its own, crushing everyone inside. Conversely, Bugatti's family and supporters vehemently alleged that the cave was purposefully destroyed by targeted missile fire or bombing.
And finally, Section 6, An Unresolved Legacy. We might never know the exact granular details of those final moments in the dust of the cave, but the aftermath, that was immediate, highly visible, and incredibly controversial. According to multiple sources, Bugti's body was eventually recovered, but it wasn't peacefully handed over to his family for traditional mourning. Instead, it was returned in a sealed, padlocked coffin. Authorities buried him under extraordinarily heavy security, flat out refusing to allow his children or family members to even see his face one last time. For a culture so deeply rooted in honor and tradition, this lack of closure was like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. It fueled massive public outrage and deep-seated conspiracy theories. So what does this all mean? Ultimately, we have to look at the results. The state's decision to utilize sheer military force to eliminate one defiant leader, rather than exhausting political dialogue, definitely did not crush the rebellion. Instead, the death of Akbar Bugti instantly sparked Balochistan's fifth, widest, and longest armed uprising, an insurgency that expanded far, far beyond his own tribal borders. It leaves us with a profound historical question to ponder. Did eliminating the Tiger of Balochistan actually solve anything, or did it merely guarantee decades of further tragedy? And how different might history look today if justice had simply been handled transparently on that cold January night in Sui? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this vital chapter of history. Keep questioning and keep learning.